All right, welcome to the Powers on Sports podcast. We've got a great interview with you. We're going to talk to Matt Zemek of Trojan Wire, part of the USA Today Sports Network. We're going to talk all things March Madness. The bracket has just been put out. We also have some other huge breaking news that I'm going to get Matt's opinion on. That kind of only one person that could probably supersede the thrill of Sunday on March Madness. This person did it, and we'll talk about that here in just a second. So we're going to go through the brackets with you. We're going to give you some tips in each bracket. We'll give you a couple sleepers, and we'll kind of give you just some general thoughts about some stuff around the tournament selection. So welcome back to the podcast, Matt.
Merry Christmas, Jason. And of course, covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as you do, it's really double Christmas.
Yes.
Like it's two Christmases in one. You get to unwrap the bracket,
yes,
and you get Tom Brady under the tree as well on the same evening. Wow.
I mean, isn't that some good news? Of all things, the only guy that could overshine the bracket is about 7 o'clock, 7:15 or whatever time it was. We get the word from our buddy TJ Reeves that Mr. Brady is coming back.
Brady in a bracket, one of the most memorable sports days in your career covering sports.
That's right. That's right. All right. Before we get to the bracket, a couple of interesting coaching hires. Whenever you and I talk, there's always coaching chatter to talk about. What'd you think of the move of Mike White leaving Florida and taking over for Tom Crean at Georgia?
Yeah, not a shocker that Mike White, pursued, quote unquote, pursued other opportunities, because that's what that was all about. He knew that he was under fire, so he just looked for an exit. That's not particularly surprising. Now, I did think that White was going to get one more year, but I think it's clear that Florida did want to move on, and so there was a mutual agreement there.
Yep, right.
I think that Mike White being at Georgia isn't a bad fit for him, that you get lower expectations. And, if you can just get Georgia to the NCAA tournament, or if you're even on the NCAA tournament bubble at Georgia on a regular basis, that's okay, especially with Kirby Smart crushing it in football. Like,
sure.
People are not going to be upset if Georgia is a number one seed in the NIT. Like that's not going to have the locals upset. Now you are expected to make the NCAA tournament every now and then,
right?
But you don't have to make it every year. So in terms of the expectations, yes, but going from Florida to Georgia, that I know that in football that's where the rivalry really matters, but these schools are just rivals in general. They're rivals in gymnastics. They're rivals in lots of different sports. They're just rivals, period.
Sure.
So, and there are other SEC job openings, Missouri, and of course LSU as well. Did he have to pick Georgia? So in terms of the rivalry angle, that's the curious part of it. But the fact that he sought another landing spot and made a downward move, that's not terrifically surprising, because he was obviously under a lot of pressure in Gainesville. And I think it's revealing that, he didn't want to try to stick it out, that he felt that making that move, getting out of there, was the better move at this point in his career. I don't necessarily think that's a miscalculation, but I do think that, he leaves Florida with business unfinished.
Sure.
And we'll see how much he learns and grows from this particular experience, because one thing we can definitely agree on is that Mike White did not recruit at the level needed to keep Florida at the Billy Donovan standard. So,
right.
That's a lesson for him. And so I guess at Georgia, that is something to watch, and we'll see if Mike White grows as a head coach. And one other thing to say about this, Jason, is that, you'll recall that Luke Walton took the Los Angeles Lakers head coaching job,
right,
without extensive head coaching experience. So he took over the Lakers at a very young age. And it just brings up the larger point that if you might want that Cadillac coaching job. And, Florida, after Billy Donovan, was a Cadillac coaching job in college basketball. So Mike White might have really wanted that job, but was he fully ready for that job? So like for younger coaches, who want that plum job, it might not necessarily serve your career in its best interest to take that great job, even if an athletic director or an NBA president or general manager offers it to you at an early age. You just might need to grow as a coach, and that job is going to be there at some point later down the line. It might be when you're age 45. It might be when you're age 50. It might not be until you're age 55. But if you're 35, 38, 40 years old, and Mike White was a fairly young coach when he went to Florida, you don't necessarily have to take that job right away. It will be there later. So like if you're a young coach, you need to be sure that you know the ins and outs, that you know exactly how to crush that Cadillac coaching job. That is a very instructive lesson to all young coaches trying to make their way up the ladder. You don't have to make the meteoric climb right away. The job can be there at a later point in time when you're truly ready.
It's it's tough. I mean, when you're a young coach and you had some success at a lower tier program, because I think he came from like Louisiana Tech, I believe.
Yep.
It's tough to say no when the SEC, when a big program in the SEC comes, where you have the resources, you're getting paid a very good salary and all that stuff. It's hard to say no when you're in the ego business of college coaching, whether it's football or basketball.
No doubt.
Were you surprised that LSU fired Will Wade when they did? I mean, he'd been under all kind of scrutiny for several years now, and the NCAA finally delivers the letter of allegations and violations. He gets fired basically the day after they lose in the SEC tournament. They let him coach in the SEC tournament, which if you're going to fire him the day after, why wouldn't you fire him before the SEC tournament? I was a little surprised that not that they fired him in general because he needed to be fired, but that they didn't let him coach out the year if you let him go this far and didn't fire him before the SEC tournament.
Yeah, I mean, the larger point here, Jason, is that, like, did LSU not expect the notice of allegations to be really, really bad?
Right.
That's the thing that gets me. Like, what was LSU anticipating? They thought they would just get a slap on the wrist, just thought they would get a measured response. I mean, it was always clear that Will Wade was in deep, that he was in big trouble.
Yeah.
So, no one at LSU anticipated this, because, obviously it fired Will Wade because the notice of allegations was extremely bad. So, if it was extremely bad, just where was the foresight on this? No one seemed to be thinking ahead, planning ahead. And let's remember, with Auburn in the NCAA tournament as a number 2 seed with a definite chance to make the Final Four, let's remember what Auburn did a year ago: self-imposed
right
an NCAA tournament ban. That's how you do it. When you're in trouble, you're proactive, you're forward thinking. If you have to eat a year, you eat that year at the beginning. You don't eat the year at the end. You eat it at the beginning, because that tells the NCAA, it tells other relevant parties that, okay, you are really accepting the punishment. You're swallowing your medicine. And LSU looks really bad doing this at the end of a season. Much lower chance that LSU is going to get leniency.
Right.
As a result, imagine if LSU had fired Will Wade in November, in October,
right,
and then self-imposed a 1-year ban. Like, that would have LSU in a much better position relative to future NCAA penalties. But now, the way all this came down, doesn't have nearly the same protection.
Especially when you had the smoking gun that was already out there of the FBI tape. It's not like the FBI tape just appeared. I mean, the FBI tape's been around for a long time. So that's the part that's even more, you knew the NCAA at some point was going to lay the hammer down to LSU when you had that tape that was out there.
Absolutely. And maybe it's just a case of, well, hey, LSU and Will Wade were able to go to a bunch of NCAA tournaments over the past few years. So maybe someone in Baton Rouge just thought, well, we'll just let this cycle play out until it comes to its natural conclusion. But what that means, though, is, like, no high-end coach is going to go to LSU right now.
Right.
Because you're looking at like 3 seasons that are going to be tremendously handicapped.
Scholarship reduction.
LSU really painted itself in a corner there.
All right, let's get to the tournament. just as you're listening to this podcast, you probably already filled out some of your brackets, maybe not all the way. So we're going to try to give you some tips in each region, some notes, nuggets about teams, players, that kind of stuff as you head into the final stages here before Thursday get started here. Just a couple general themes about the selection process from your perspective, Matt. Any big surprises, just theme wise from the committee?
Well, it's interesting, Jason, in that the biggest story to me in terms of inclusion and exclusion was a team that really was off the radar, but it was revealed that became surprisingly close to getting in. So Dayton, it was revealed on the CBS's selection show that Dayton was the very first team out. And if any team has a COVID-19 problem, Dayton would be first in line as a replacement. So wait a minute, Dayton ahead of Oklahoma and Texas A&M and the other teams that were left out, SMU as well. Dayton was the first team out. I mean, like Dayton, lost to Richmond in the Atlantic 10 semifinals.
Right.
Didn't seem to be anywhere near the at-large cut line. Everyone felt that, when I say everyone, bracketologists were pretty unanimous in saying Dayton needed to win the A10 tournament. So Dayton didn't even get to the Atlantic 10 final on Sunday, and yet was still the first team out. So what does that tell you? It tells you that if Dayton had beaten Richmond in the Atlantic 10 semifinals and had merely gotten to the A10 final, didn't even have to win that. If Dayton had simply gotten to the final of the Atlantic 10 title game, it would have been in. So there were some very interesting calculations here. The other thing, before you jump in, Jason, Virginia Tech won the ACC tournament, beat Duke, the heavyweight, and yet was an 11 seed. So that tells you that Virginia Tech would have been out if it had not beaten Duke. So the committee really valued Dayton a lot higher than Virginia Tech. So that is an eye grabber.
Yeah, that to me, that was one of the themes. Was Sunday, the last day of the selection, you had two bid stealers, Richmond and Virginia Tech, won bids. They weren't getting into the tournament at all if they don't win their conference tournament. And like you said, Richmond keeps Dayton out. And if Dayton would have gotten into the tournament, they would have most likely had a home game in the play-in game in Dayton on Tuesday or Wednesday night.
That's right. And we've seen that before. Dayton played Boise State several years ago in the first four, and Dayton did win that game. So it does raise the point that, if Dayton's on the bubble and is very near the first four, well, Dayton gets a home game. And that's a thorny little problem for the committee whenever that scenario emerges.
Yeah, I mean, there's really nothing the committee can do about that part of it. I don't blame. I mean, you can't blame anybody for that, because the reason Dayton is the site for these play-in games is because it's pretty centrally located around the country, so teams can go east or west depending on who wins and loses and when their next game is. So that's why it's Dayton, and it's very centrally located for people to travel and all that stuff. So you ain't nothing.
They also get a great walk-up crowd from the community, which has fully embraced the first four since it
absolutely began. And that plays a big part of it as well, no doubt about it. All right, so let's any surprises? Were you surprised that Baylor was the last number one seed, and maybe not a Tennessee, maybe not an Auburn, one of those kind of teams? Were you surprised Baylor, who lost, I think, pretty early in the Big 12 quarterfinals, I believe, was still the fourth one seed?
Not particularly surprised, and I really have no problem with that. I think Baylor dropped below Kansas as the fourth one seed because you have Jonathan Chachua, their forward, out for the season, and Baylor has been dogged by injuries. So I think the committee looked at the injury element and downgraded Baylor, shipped the Bears east. So I actually think they got that one right. My big thing, my big problem with the committee, and this is my big problem every year, it's the bracketing part of forming the NCAA tournament field. That the selection, bubble inclusion and exclusion, taking one bubble team over another, it's one flawed team versus another flawed team. The bubble teams, can only blame themselves for the games they didn't win, not doing enough. So that's an overrated point of outrage. And then the seeding, I think seeding was fine. I mean, I thought that Tennessee should have been a 2
Right.
and Duke should have been a 3.
I was surprised. I was surprised Michigan was not in the play-in game as opposed to
Yeah,
Indiana.
I think Michigan deserved to go to Dayton. Absolutely. You need to look at what Indiana did, and Indiana, of course, beat Illinois after beating Michigan.
Down
So yeah,
17. Down
you would
17 to Michigan.
That's
Down
right.
17 to Michigan.
Yep. So you would think that Indiana did more work than Michigan in terms of earning a bye and bypassing Dayton. But anyway, the thing that the committee does horribly every year, it's not so much the seeding, it's not so much the selection of bubble teams, it's the bracketing. And so the bracketing is always not given nearly as much time as it should be given. Now, one smaller bracketing problem is that UConn is a 5 seed. Now, a 5 seed is not a protected seed.
Right.
Top 4 seeds are protected seeds. If you are a top 4 seed, you should get the favorable geographical placement. But UConn, as a 5, gets to stay home in Buffalo, right near the campus. And Arkansas is the 4, which has to go to Buffalo.
Right.
So you have a higher seed is basically going to wind up playing a road game against a lower seed. So that is lazy bracketing. And college basketball historians such as yourself will remember that in 2014, UConn was a 7 seed and yet got Buffalo for the first weekend, and then Madison Square Garden in New York for the Sweet 16, the Elite 8. So UConn was a 7 seed, but was treated like a 1 seed in terms of being placed very close to home. So it just shows how lazy the committee is in bracketing. And the other really big bracketing problem I have with the committee is look at all the rematches which were potentially set up in the Elite 8. Arizona could play Tennessee. They met during the regular season. Gonzaga could play Duke or Texas Tech. They both played in the regular season. Gonzaga lost to Duke. Gonzaga beat Texas Tech. You had so many different rematches in the Elite 8. And that's just lazy because this is a national tournament, and the charm of the NCAA tournament, it's a lot like the World Series before interleague play. You know, the American League and National League were complete mysteries to each other. You had 2 completely different sets of ground rules and styles. So in a 1985 or 87 World Series, the 2 teams had never met. So everything was fresh and new. The NCAA tournament should be like that, you know. And so when you map out the seed list and the bracketing, all right, so a 1 seed, you know, the strongest 1 seed against the weakest 2 seed. So 1 versus 8 on the seed list. Your weakest 1 seed against your strongest 2 seed, 4 versus 5.
Right.
Let's say there's a rematch. You slide the seed list, you know, you slide the teams by 1 on the seed list so that you get a fresh matchup. So the committee had no problem doing it the right way with Baylor and Kentucky. They did not play during the regular season. They were the 1 and 2 seeds in the East. But with the other matchups, like there's just no reason to have Duke and Gonzaga playing each other again. You put Duke in a separate region. You put Duke with Arizona, right? That, you know, a matchup that hasn't occurred, and you just flip flop. You flip flop the matchups. You put Villanova with Gonzaga.
But Matt, as you and I know, a lot of these
it's
things,
so lazy. It's lazy to be bracketing all these rematches when you can just very easily avoid them.
It is. I get you 100%. But as you know, this is a business for CBS and Turner and all those people, and they want matchups for television. Potential Final 8, Gonzaga versus Coach K in his last year. You know, Kentucky and heavy. You know, potential heavyweights. So you got some of that lore that you do for TV, and there's matchups. For example, Auburn playing Jacksonville State. Those schools are probably 2 hours apart, and I know it's a 2:15 matchup, and nobody probably cares. But again, that was on purpose. I can promise you that's going to get more people to Greenville, South Carolina, because it's Auburn versus Jacksonville State, as opposed if it was Auburn versus Delaware, things like that. Delaware and Villanova. Those are close proximity to each other. That's a matchup that was for TV and things like that. So, and I'm with you. You're right. They do get lazy, but sometimes they fall in love with the allure of the television matchup. And don't think CBS probably doesn't have a little bit of influence on some of this stuff to some degree behind the scenes.
No doubt. I mean, like that is how it operates. It just isn't how it should operate. And the nuance here, I mean, now, Gonzaga Duke in March. All right, like that game's going to get monster ratings if we get to it. But like you can find monster rating games, I think, and still honor the principle of not having rematches in the regular season. Like, Kentucky Baylor, that is a properly seeded and bracketed matchup. But like the 1 versus 2 matchup, which I think would get really big ratings, but the committee sought to not pursue, Arizona, Kentucky. That could have been a 1 versus 2, but the committee didn't put that 1 seed and that 2 seed together in the same region. But like that would get very high ratings, higher ratings than I think Baylor, Kentucky would get, because Arizona's rise to and return to prominence under Tommy Lloyd. So I just think and Duke, whoever Duke's playing in an Elite Eight game, that's going to get
for example
ratings. And of course, one has to point out, Jason, by having Duke versus Gonzaga in the Elite Eight, that means you don't get that in the Final Four.
Correct.
Which you also want to keep track of. But you're entirely right that TV does dictate a substantial amount of this process, and we're kidding ourselves if we think that's not true.
Because again, we mentioned Duke because Coach K is on his way out. You could have Coach K and Tom Izzo in the second round. That's going to be a Saturday. I don't know if that's a Saturday. I think that's a Saturday game. That could be. I mean, that'll be prime time Saturday night. Humongous rating if it's Duke, Michigan State. As an example, or UCLA, Indiana is a potential second round matchup. So these are done. These are your bracketing concepts are done again, partially for some TV as well, because they want ratings. They're paying a ton of money for advertising and all that stuff. And they want to know people are going to be in the building too. So when the game is in Greenville, they want to try to have 2 teams relatively close to Greenville to bring some people. So, especially with last year with not having fans and all that stuff, I'm sure the NCAA took a bath financially, which we get it. But yeah, I mean, that's just part of running a business of this tournament. The tournament has gotten so big over the years. Unfortunately, these kind of thoughts that creep into it, as opposed to the more pure way to do it of trying to get the best game and try not to have rematches until you absolutely have to.
No question. And Coach K against Tom Izzo, like there's just zero question that CBS wanted that.
Prime time,
that is a setting up the tournament for television purposes.
All right, let's get to the brackets. We'll just go through each bracket. I'll give you a couple tidbits on each bracket, and then you can give me some thoughts and all that kind of good. All right, let's go. Let's start out west. Gonzaga's the 1 seed. Potential second round matchup with Boise State, which Leon Rice used to coach with Mark Few. So again, kind of another one of those little bracketing tidbits that's potentially, you got first round, you got Boise State and Memphis with Penny Hardaway. Just your thoughts on the top half of that bracket.
Yeah, so I follow Boise State out here in the West. I'm based in Phoenix and watch plenty of Mountain West basketball. And the thing with Boise State, first off, the Broncos have a great defense, but secondly, their defense gets tougher and better in the final 5 minutes of a game. If you followed anything with Boise State this season, it's a crunch time clutch defense. It's a defense that gets not just stops, but it gets the biggest stops of the game very reliably. Boise State's held a lot of opponents under 60 points per game. I mean, did it against San Diego State in the Mountain West Tournament Championship game, and that's an event that San Diego State has historically owned, but Boise State was able to turn the tide. That's a really tough Boise State team. Now, of course, Memphis is riding the wave, and credit to Penny Hardaway. He coached horribly the first few months of the season, lost to Georgia, lost to Ole Miss, lost to Tulane, lost to East Carolina, got it turned around. So that team was at rock bottom, and Penny was able to lift it out of the doldrums and was able to beat Houston twice. That's why the Tigers are in the NCAA tournament. And I don't think anyone should be downgrading Memphis for failing to beat Houston a third time in the AAC final. Like, you knew that Houston was going to be sick and tired of losing to Memphis, and that game was going to matter more to Houston. So no one should be downgrading Memphis based on that. So, Boise State's tough. Memphis is more skilled. I would give a slight lean to Memphis in that matchup.
Yep. Dangerous team there. Arkansas, Musselman was at Nevada when they made those runs in Nevada, and he had a really good run last year at Arkansas to the Final Eight. Really good tournament coach. So look out for Arkansas there. Bottom half of that bracket, I think a team that could potentially win, Texas Tech, you got the bottom half. You got Duke, you got Michigan State and Davidson, that first round game, very sneaky game. Michigan State gets all the hype with Izzo, but they've really limped to the finish line here. Davidson lost on Sunday to Richmond, which allowed Richmond to get in, but a very interesting matchup there. Michigan State Davidson.
Yeah, I mean, this is a game for the basketball junkies. Tom Izzo, and let's for people who don't know, Bob McKillop is one of the greatest coaches, not just in college basketball but sports. And
nobody's ever heard of.
Yep, I mean, he's Steph Curry. He's the guy who coached Steph Curry in college. How many people on the street, if you said who coached Steph Curry in college, how many people would come up with Bob McKillop? Right. Not a majority, I don't think. So he's like this anonymous great coach. And I just want to say, if Bob McKillop 10, 15, 20 years ago, had ever wanted to get a job at, let's say, North Carolina or NC Kentucky, State, and one of those at various blue blood or prominent programs, he would have crushed it there.
Yeah,
zero doubt in my mind. But he has wanted to stay at Davidson, out of the limelight, just likes coaching at a comparatively smaller school.
Yeah,
let's remember that Davidson had been in the Southern Conference when Steph Curry was there.
Yeah,
in the late 2000s. Davidson's now graduated up to the Atlantic 10.
Yeah.
And the Atlantic 10 is where Xavier was making bunches of NCAA tournaments and Sweet 16s.
Yeah.
Under Sean Miller, under Thad Matta. The Atlantic 10s where St. Joseph's and Phil Martelli had a number one seed and made the Elite Eight. In 2004, the Jameer Nelson team.
Yep.
The Atlantic 10 was an excellent conference. I mean, John Chaney and Temple were in the Atlantic 10 conference for decades. So Bob McKillop takes Davidson from the little SoCon, the Southern Conference.
Shaka Smart, and VCU.
Yep, absolutely. He takes Davidson from the little guy conference, the SoCon, up to the Atlantic 10, and he's owning it. Yep. He's leading that conference. So it tells you how great a coach Bob McKillop is. Wanted to give your listeners on the Powers on Sports podcast a little bit of extra appreciation for the career and credentials of Bob McKillop. Now, the matchup against Tom Izzo, Michigan State seems to have found something. Michigan State really played a lot better at the Big Ten tournament than it had during the regular season. The really big key, Tyson Walker, their guard, finally seemed to play with a level of confidence and clarity, which had been missing. And if you talk to Michigan State experts, one of them is Deshaun Tate, who I know has appeared on my shows. He's probably appeared on your shows. So he's a Michigan State expert. He told me earlier in the year, turnovers was the huge Achilles heel for Michigan State. Well, Michigan State committed very few turnovers in that win over Wisconsin in the Big Ten quarterfinals. And so that's Tyson Walker learning how to play guard and handling the ball so much better. So I think if Tyson Walker continues on his upward trajectory and he plays a solid game, he doesn't need to score a ton, but if he commits few turnovers, facilitates the offense, and Michigan State limits turnovers, it's going to be very hard for Davidson to beat Michigan State.
It's a tricky game for me. I think it could go either way. You got Alabama versus the Rutgers Notre Dame winner. I think if Rutgers can get to Alabama, that could be a tricky game for Alabama because Alabama lives and dies on the threes. Alabama beat Gonzaga earlier in the year. They've had some huge wins, but I mean, when they're shooting the ball well, they beat anybody in the country. A little surprised that they were a 6 seed. I think this is a spot Rutgers could potentially, if they get through Notre Dame, could upset Alabama. Rutgers is a rugged team, good guard play. You got a good coach. I think it's upset alert there if Rutgers can get to Alabama. But I also think if Alabama can beat Rutgers, they could turn around and win a couple games in this tournament and get to an Elite Eight because they're that good as well. I know you've
Yeah.
seen Gonzaga. And I know you've seen Alabama Gonzaga early in the year when Alabama beat Gonzaga pretty good.
Alabama beat Gonzaga by 9 points in Seattle. So technically a neutral site game since
Right.
Gonzaga is located in Spokane, but essentially a road game in Seattle.
Right.
Alabama won by 9, and it was a decisive win. Like Gonzaga was never particularly close
Right.
down the stretch. Alabama won that game comfortably. So you have an Alabama team which at its best can beat Gonzaga in Seattle, can beat Baylor. Alabama beat Baylor. So Alabama's beaten 2 number 1 seeds, also beat Tennessee.
Sure.
Now, and has just a pile of awesome high-end wins. Alabama beat Houston before Houston lost its star player, Marcus Sasser,
Right.
to injury. Now, Houston's a 5 seed. If Sasser had not gotten hurt, Houston's probably a 2 or a 3.
Right.
So Alabama has like 4 wins over top 10 level teams, if you include Tennessee as a top 10 team.
Absolutely.
So Alabama at its best is amazing. Alabama at its worst lost to Georgia, lost to Missouri, just lost to Vanderbilt in the preliminary round of the SEC tournament. So you don't know what version of Alabama you're going to get. And that SEC early round game against Vanderbilt, Alabama led by 13 with about 12 minutes left, and then collapsed down the stretch. So even within the same game, you get these incredible mood swings from Alabama. So you don't know what version of Alabama you're going to get, and I have given up trying to predict what version of Alabama is going to show up. Rutgers, Notre Dame, that first 4 game, Rutgers has a great home court advantage at the RAC, the Rutgers Activity Center. It has a sponsored name, but people know that building in Piscataway, New Jersey, as the RAC, and Rutgers is great in it. But you get Rutgers outside the RAC, different team. So I like Notre Dame over Rutgers, and then Notre Dame, Alabama. Football school in a basketball game, that would be a pretty neat matchup. And let's give credit to Mike Bray. Notre Dame had been horrible the past 2 seasons, and Irish fans were losing patience, and I don't blame them either. It was another one of those scenarios where a guy who's been at a place for 2 decades, finally seems to run out of steam. Everything looks and feels stale, and it's a natural instinct to say, we need a new face, we need a new guy, we need a new leader. Mike Bray getting Notre Dame back to the NCAA tournament, that's a very, very impressive feat for him.
And the sleeper team in this region for me is Texas Tech. They got a bunch of new players, transfer portal guys. They are very good. They played very, very well in the Big 12, arguably the best conference in America. That's a sleeper team as a 3 seed there in that part of the bracket. Who do you like coming out of the West, Matt?
I like Gonzaga, and I will note that the bracket is set up for an exact rematch of the 2019 West Regional Final. Top seeded Gonzaga against 3rd seeded Texas Tech. That is exactly what we had in 2019. Yep. Not just Gonzaga playing Texas Tech, but the seeds were exactly the same. Texas Tech was a 3 in 2019 when it went to the national title game, and Gonzaga and Texas Tech, they did play earlier this season. A neutral site game in December in Phoenix, and Gonzaga won that game handily. So I think Texas Tech plays Gonzaga a lot closer this time around, but I do think that Gonzaga still finds the answers, because Texas Tech, we've seen the Red Raiders the past few weeks really struggle to score. Texas Tech scored 2 points in the final 9 minutes and 48 seconds of its loss at Oklahoma State just before the Big 12 tournament. And then was lucky to beat Oklahoma 56-55 in the Big 12 semis. So even if Texas Tech does a better job defending Gonzaga, it's still going to be tough for the Red Raiders to score enough to win. So Gonzaga goes back to the Final Four.
Yeah, I think Chet Holmgren from Gonzaga is the difference here. The versatility he's got inside, outside. He's a shot blocker. He's pretty thin, but again, he's done a great job this year. And Few does a great job on the offensive end of the court. Gonzaga is probably one of the top 5 offensive efficiency teams in the country. They got players, they got wing players, they got guards. Nemhard at guard is just a stabilizer for them. He gets them in their sets, gets them the right shots, and then you got Holmgren in the middle there who's definitely going to be a force for Gonzaga.
No doubt. And just one thing to say about Gonzaga is that when you look at Tommy Lloyd at Arizona, and you realize that he was, at Mark Few's side for 2 decades, you see the similarities in how Arizona and Gonzaga play. You see the Mark Few influence in how Tommy Lloyd coaches Arizona, where their half-court sets, every action is purposeful. Nothing's wasted, and they're always finding the angles to get right to the basket. That's a strong unifying theme between Gonzaga and Arizona.
Yeah, we're going to go to the South next. A quick thought on just you brought up Arizona. The dominance, not the dominance, but the reemergence of the teams out west this year. Very impressive. Gonzaga, Arizona, UCLA's had a good year. You have the Mountain West teams. You got a team like San Francisco. You have a teams from the West Coast Conference, St. Mary's. Very much reemergence of the West Coast basketball is a definite theme here in this tournament, especially a team like San Francisco that's been so long and not getting to the tournament, and now they're a 10 seed.
Yeah, it's San Francisco's first NCAA tournament in 24 years since 1998. And that's something that the West Coast Conference really needed. The West Coast Conference needed to have a season in which it wasn't just Gonzaga and St. Mary's. So San Francisco brings something newer and deeper to the WCC. And then you have the Mountain West getting 4 teams into the field. Now, the Mountain West was a powerhouse conference. You could legitimately call it a powerhouse conference 11 years ago in 2011, when you had the Jimmer Fredette BYU team. This was when BYU was still in the Mountain West, and you had Kawhi Leonard in San Diego State. Mm-hmm. So the Jimmer Fredette BYU team was a 3 seed, and the Kawhi Leonard San Diego State team was a 2 seed. So the Mountain West was exceptionally good that year, 2011. Now, not quite as good as 2011 this year in 2022, but getting 4 teams in and getting Wyoming back into the NCAA tournament. It speaks to the depth that's found in the Mountain West. The Pac-12 did not have a great year. The Pac-12 was top heavy. It was just Arizona, UCLA, and USC in the NCAA tournament. But the teams that are in the field, especially Arizona, have a great shot to go to the Final Four. So, there's depth in the West in terms of the Mountain West and the WCC. Not a lot of depth in the Pac-12, but you have a home run threat with Arizona.
In the South region, a game that gets my attention in round 1, Loyola Chicago and Ohio State. Just the gritty guttiness of Loyola Chicago win the Missouri Valley again with Drew Valentine as their first-year coach. Moser goes to Oklahoma, so they new coach, bunch of new players. But again, Loyola Chicago still getting it done in the Missouri Valley. A challenging matchup for Ohio State in round 1 with the balance of Loyola Chicago.
So Ohio State's the 7, Loyola's the 10, but this is going to be one of those rare matchups, Jason, in which the lower seed is likely to be the betting favorite at tip-off time. I think most people who fill out a bracket are going to take Loyola in this game because Ohio State's been stale this season. It's EJ Liddell and not a whole lot else.
Yep.
There have been some injuries at Ohio State, but just in terms of 5 guys on the floor, the Buckeyes are not a complete team. It's usually Liddell and 1 or 2 other guys supporting him, whereas Loyola is really a 5-as-1 team. Like, there's no superstar, but you have 5 players working really well together. An important note, Marquise Kennedy was a key cog for this Loyola team. He was injured for a good part of the season, especially February, but Loyola got him back just in time for the Missouri Valley tournament. And Loyola was extremely impressive in the Missouri Valley tournament. Loyola gave up, I believe, over 100 points to Northern Iowa in an overtime game at the end of February. I think gave up 87 in regulation, but over 100 including the overtime. Right. That was without Marquise Kennedy. And then Loyola gave up roughly half as many points, under 50, to Northern Iowa in the Missouri Valley tournament. So night and day difference, and that tells you how much Marquise Kennedy means to the Loyola team. So Loyola is whole and Ohio State's not whole. And I think that's a good, succinct way of expressing why Loyola is the clear choice in that game.
I think Tennessee's got a pretty good route to the Sweet 16, potentially Colorado State or Michigan in round 2. I like obviously Tennessee is flying right now after coming through here down here in Tampa this weekend and winning the SEC tournament. Played really well with under Rick Barnes, the guards. They got a very diverse roster. They play a lot of guys. They got some young guards. They've got some big guys. They got some power. I like Tennessee a lot. Can Rick Barnes finally get the monkey off his bat? He's not had the most tournament success. Tennessee's an interesting team as a 3 seed. A lot of people thought they potentially could have been the 4th number 1 seed, or at worst a 2 seed with what they did in the SEC, but they end up being a 3 seed there with Villanova, Ohio State, and that bottom end of they're in the Arizona bracket as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't get it. That Tennessee beat Kentucky twice. You know, the win over Kentucky in the SEC semifinals was the second win over Kentucky, and this time it was on a neutral floor, not at home. And then Tennessee wins the SEC tournament for the first time since 1979. That doesn't get Tennessee a 2 seed, and you have Duke playing in, you know, a very, very down ACC this year, and yet Duke still gets the higher seed. I mean, so what does that tell you? It means that, you know, Coach K, you know, got the benefit of the doubt in terms of the seeding line. One could argue, though, that Duke being sent to West with the Zags maybe isn't the best setup for them, and that Tennessee, which already beat Arizona earlier this season, maybe Tennessee with Arizona is a better matchup for the Vols. But the problem here is that Tennessee has to play Villanova as the 2 seed.
Right.
In a potential Sweet 16 game. So, Tennessee's opening weekend bracket is great, but the second weekend bracket is pretty difficult. And so the Tennessee being seeded 3rd, I think there were better paths and better opportunities. Like if Tennessee had been put as the 2 in the East in Baylor's bracket, you know, that might have given the Vols a better path to their first ever Final Four. So ultimately, I don't think Tennessee was done too many favors. The first weekend's fine, but the second weekend wasn't.
Sleeper team in this bracket for me might be Houston. Very good. I mean, Kelvin Sampson's done a really good job at Houston. You know, he got in all that trouble in Indiana and all that stuff, but he's done a great job at Houston. A potential showdown in the second round with Illinois. You got a battle of big men. You got Coburn for Illinois against that rugged Houston squad. They've always been a rugged team, especially defensively. Houston, if Houston can score, Houston could potentially give Arizona a game because Arizona's got some bigs. But if Houston can score, they've always had the ability to play defense.
Yeah, I think there is a real opportunity for Houston here, even without Marcus Sasser, because Houston is such an effort team. And when you look at Illinois, I mean, Illinois is a very erratic team. Now, Illinois can be really good when Alfonso Plummer, the transfer from Utah, is hitting 3-pointers. I mean, he can. Alfonso Plummer's like a collegiate version of Vinnie Johnson, you know, the microwave from the Detroit Pistons and the Bad Boys in the late 1980s. I mean, Alfonso Plummer is a Vinnie Johnson type who can, you know, he'll just hit like 3-pointers in a couple minutes. You know, he'll personally give you like a 9-2 run. When he's hitting, that's when Illinois is extremely difficult to beat. But Plummer comes and goes, and really a lot of Illini players, including guard Andre Curbelo, they're very inconsistent. I mean, now the ceiling is high, but the floor is low, and kind of much like Alabama, there's just so much variance between the best and the worst versions of Illinois. You put that up against Houston, where you know, the Cougars are always going to give you something recognizable. You know, you're always going to get tough defense, good effort, solid rebounding. You know, the variable is, as you said, whether Houston can score, but you're always going to get the defense and rebounding from a Kelvin Sampson team. So give me the steady team over the volatile team. I definitely like Houston over Illinois if we get that 5 versus 4 matchup. I do think that Arizona is a very tough team, even though it's a fast-paced team, a team that likes to run. I mean, Arizona was down 10 to a very good UCLA team in the Pac-12 tournament final without Kirk Kriisa and still found a way to come back. That is it. That is a great display of toughness. You have Koloko and Tubelis, both two very different kinds of big men in the paint. So Houston, could annoy and bother Arizona, but I don't think Houston would beat Arizona. I think the Wildcats are equipped to win that matchup.
I'm with you as well. I got to give a shout out to my alma mater, my UAB Blazers. Get it done in the Conference USA title game, which my man, our friend TJ Reeves called down in Dallas over the weekend. Jordan Walker, a prolific scorer for UAB. Andy Kennedy, the head coach, a former UAB player. Jordan Walker with 42 points over the weekend in that triple overtime semifinal win versus Middle Tennessee. He's had multiple games this year with 40 plus. So that's the kind of guy, if he gets hot in a one-game scenario, potentially against Houston, could be a team that could give Houston some problems because, again, UAB can score the ball. Andy Kennedy is a good offensive coach, former coach at Ole Miss, coming back to his alma mater. So good for UAB getting back in the tournament, winning that Conference USA title.
You know that Gene Bartow is looking down from heaven and smiling. And worth noting with Houston and UAB, like that could have been an Elite Eight game in 1982, 40 years ago.
Yes.
And actually, UAB made the Elite Eight in 1982, and Houston got all the way to the Final Four before losing to Dean Smith's eventual national champion North Carolina Tar Heels. But like UAB and Houston were both really, really good. In college basketball in the early 1980s for the younger folks in the crowd.
A good friend of mine, Steve Mitchell, was on that UAB team back in the early mid 80s that made all those runs in the tournament. A guy that I worked with for many years when I was working at UAB. So shout out to my guys, Steve Mitchell and Gene Bartow and the crew. So
awesome.
Yeah. Who do you like? Who do you like in the South? Who do you like to get regional final? Is it Villanova, Arizona for you, or do you like Tennessee, Arizona?
Yeah. Rick Barnes against Jay Wright in the NCAA tournament. Who are you riding with? I think you have to go with Jay Wright. Rick Barnes, has done a magnificent job, of course, with this Tennessee team. This team did not seem to have Final Four potential in early to mid-January, but Barnes reworked the lineup, went to a 3-guard lineup. It brought out the best in this team. But if we get into the NCAA tournament, like who has earned the benefit of the doubt and who has to prove himself, we all know that answer. So I will take Villanova over Tennessee. And I think that if we get Villanova against Arizona, it really becomes a matter of, is Kirk Kriisa going to be healthy for that game? I think Arizona can get through the first weekend without Kirk Kriisa healthy, but it is going to need Kriisa on that second weekend to get all the way to the Final Four. So, Colin Gillespie wasn't at the height of his powers for much of the season, but the past month he's been at his very best. And so Colin Gillespie in a Sweet 16 and then an Elite Eight, I trust him more than I would trust Arizona, especially if Kirk Kriisa is not 100% and can't give Arizona the shooting to space the floor against Villanova's defense. So I will take Villanova from the South region.
That-a-boy. All right, listen to the Powers on Sports podcast. I'm Jason, along with Matt Zemek from USA Today's Trojan Wire. We're just going through all the brackets, each region. We're giving you some nuggets about a bunch of these teams, giving you some picks and all that such. So let's move to the Midwest. Kansas is the 1 seed, Auburn the 2 seed here. The 3 seed is, let me find the 3 seed. The 3 seed is Wisconsin, and the 4 seed is Providence. What do you think of the top 4? Providence coming in, they got beaten early in that Big East tournament. They won the Big East regular season, albeit they had to play 3 less games than everybody else, which gave them a little advantage. What do you think of Providence? Again, a lot of people think another team from out your way, the Jackrabbits from South Dakota State, who've won 30 in a row, haven't lost since December, is a very dangerous team in this bracket.
Yeah, I think if there's a 13-over-4 upset in the bracket, this is where everyone's going to go because, as you've said, South Dakota State hasn't lost since the middle of December, didn't lose a single conference game. Murray State, it's another team that hasn't lost a single conference game, either regular season or tournament. So the Jackrabbits are definitely legit. And then with Providence, picking South Dakota State over Providence is not an indication that Providence is overrated. What it means is, like other highly seeded teams that don't have, jump out of the building talent or athleticism, Providence does not have a roster of future NBA players, unlike, the number one seeds that you see. But what Providence did was, just does all the little things well, makes free throws, limits turnovers. Providence just is a responsible, tough, poised team, and it's won so many close games, so many overtime games, and it was able to rise all the way up to a 4 seed Big East regular season champion. So like Providence is the real deal. Providence is a really, really good team, and high seeds exist because they win a lot of close games. Like, you need to win close games to prove yourself in college basketball, in any sport. So Providence is legit. Providence is not overrated, but Providence is not an overwhelming team. Right. Providence is not an imposing team. And so against a team which is not imposing, South Dakota State's elite offense and balance and versatility has a really good chance to pull off the upset. So I just want to underscore that you can pick South Dakota State and not say or think that it's a negative reflection on Providence. It's just, South Dakota State's really good, and Providence is not, a juggernaut. Providence is a good team, but there's a difference between being a good team and being an absolute powerhouse. And Providence is not a powerhouse. That's just the way the Friars are. They depend on winning close games. The laws of averages are bound to cut against them.
And that game's going to be a very similar athletic game. South Dakota won't be that much out-athleted by Providence, whereas if South Dakota State played a more athletic team, it might be a different situation. The athleticism between the two teams are probably pretty similar with those kids. And of course, if you don't know much about the bracket, they got the coolest name in college sports, man, the Jackrabbits.
It's certainly one of the best nicknames out there.
All right, let's go to the bottom of that region. Team you cover every day, USC. Will play as a 7 seed. Will play the Hurricanes of Miami, another football matchup in the 7-10 matchup, in Greenville, South Carolina. Give us a little lowdown on USC and kind of what that matchup looks like to you.
So, having followed USC very closely all season long, I have to say that this is a matchup which is very thorny and problematic for the Trojans. And why is it problematic? USC's backcourt has struggled this season. Boogie Ellis has been good, but he has not been great. I mean, he was great in the most recent game for USC against UCLA in the semifinals of the Pac-12 tournament, but Boogie Ellis has been hot and cold. He's been a hit or miss player, for USC over the long haul, over the full extent of the season. And what's Miami's strength? Miami's strength is its guards. Cameron McGusty, Charlie Moore, veteran senior guards, who Miami depends on. So like they are always the go-to guys for the Hurricanes. And so Miami is in a position to win the battle of the backcourts. We say, the backcourts in March, that takes center stage. If USC is going to win, the backcourt doesn't need to outplay Miami's backcourt. I think that's asking too much. But if USC can pretty much fight to a draw, fairly close in the backcourt, and then it can dominate in the front court with Isaiah Mobley, with Chavez Goodwin, they can play USC can play volleyball on the glass,
right,
against Miami. USC has more length. USC has more size. So if the game is decided in the paint and near the rim, that's a game USC can win. But if the game is decided by backcourt play and perimeter shooting, that puts it definitely in Miami's corner. Also, this game is an early game, so USC is going to be with early body clocks in this particular game, and it's in Greenville, South Carolina, so it's going to be a lot
Cross
closer
country.
to Miami than it will to Los Angeles. So really, there's a lot of things that are working against USC in this game. I obviously want to see USC win, but it's a matchup with a lot of dynamics that are cutting against the Trojans.
Yeah, Enfield, remember Enfield's former Florida Gulf Coast coach, Dunk City back in the day, has done a great job at USC, just got a contract extension a week or so back. He was in the mix for his name was being mentioned for Maryland and some other big jobs. So Enfield's done a great job. Larinaga, who's a very good coach at Miami, kind of similar to what we talked about with Bob McKillop. He was at George Mason forever, took them to the Final Four, and then took the job in Miami. He's done a pretty solid job at Miami in his 6 or 7 years there. So very good matchup there. So you think Auburn's vulnerable?
Oh, definitely. I mean, you looked at Auburn in the SEC tournament against Texas A&M, and the thing that Bruce Pearl has to solve with this team is he has to get his guards under control. They can't be jacking up 30-foot jump shots.
Right.
And it's been a recurring thing. I've talked to Auburn people over the course of the season. They just can't understand why the guards think they have to take so many shots when you have a possible number 1 pick in the NBA draft, Jabari Smith. The offense has to run through him. He needs to touch the ball consistently whenever Auburn gets a half-court possession. He doesn't need to be the guy who shoots, but he has to get a touch that the defense has to respond to him, react to him. You free up space elsewhere on the floor. Auburn has to straighten out its half-court offense. I don't like USC's matchup against Miami, but if USC is somehow able to get past Miami, USC, I think, matches up really well with Auburn. The kind of way that Auburn plays, USC, if it can drag Auburn into the mud, and if Auburn's guards are not patient in getting the ball to Jabari Smith, that's a game USC can win, because USC, Miami's backcourt makes really good, responsible decisions, and
Right.
Auburn's backcourt does not. And so even though Auburn has more jump out of the building talent, and Auburn has a lot more size compared to Miami, Auburn isn't very disciplined. So Auburn's ceiling's very high, but Auburn's floor can be very low, as we saw against Texas A&M. So if USC is able to deal with that very difficult matchup against Miami, I think USC can definitely pull the upset against Auburn. Also, Miami, because of its veteran backcourt, the Hurricanes would be in a position to beat Auburn. I'm not sure I'd call my shot, but I think that's, if it's not a 50-50 game, it's certainly very close, both for USC and Miami against Auburn in the round of 32.
I think personally you're going to see Auburn play better, because I think they're going to get out of the SEC conference play where they're used to seeing the same people over and over. I think that size of Auburn, of Jamari Smith, Kessler, I think the guard play is not great, but it's not horrific. I think you're going to see Bruce Pearl play a lot of guys, play a bench, press, things like that he likes to do. So I think Auburn's, and this is going to be a good spot for Auburn, I think, to get at least to the Sweet 16 here, if not to the Final 8, because in the other half of that bracket, you got Wisconsin, and then you got all the trouble that's going on at LSU. Wisconsin potentially basically is going to have 2 home games if they win the first one. Those games are in Milwaukee, so Wisconsin will have a overwhelming home court advantage in Milwaukee. I think they should get to the Sweet 16 comfortably. Do you think Kansas gets it? Do you think Kansas gets all the way to the Elite Eight, or do you think a team like Iowa, who just won the Big Ten tournament, is another sleeper team here? A lot of scoring. The Murray brothers are really good. The McCaffrey brothers are on that team. McCaffrey's a good coach. They can score the ball. I think that's a dangerous team if they can play a little bit of defense in Iowa City.
Yeah, I mean, so, Kansas got, in my mind, a great draw. I think Kansas really hit the jackpot with this particular draw, because let's remember, Iowa is the 5 seed here. Iowa has not been to the Sweet 16 since 1999 under Dr. Tom Davis.
Yeah.
So, and what do we know about Iowa under Fran McCaffrey? That the Hawkeyes, they have a tough time defending. Like
First
Fran
one to
coaches,
80. First to 80.
Yep, that's right. I mean, we saw that in the round of 32 last year against Oregon. Iowa was the 2 seed, but if you looked at that game, you would have thought Oregon was the 2 seed. Iowa was the 7, because Oregon just had much better two-way players than Iowa did. So, Fran coaches offense, but defense has usually been lacking. And people will say, well, Iowa held Purdue to 66 in the Big Ten tournament championship game. You know what? Purdue's underachieved this season, and the Big Ten has underachieved this season. I know the Big Ten has 9 NCAA tournament bids. That's really just a product of a lot of teams being just inside the cut line. Like Rutgers, Indiana, and Michigan all barely got in. They just had enough to make it. There's no really great team in the Big Ten. Kansas just absolutely hit the jackpot in this region. Kansas would beat Iowa, and also Providence. Providence is not that. It's not a fearsome number 4 seed. Like Illinois has a lot more upside than Providence if you're going to compare number 4 seeds in the NCAA tournament. So Kansas getting Providence as opposed to Illinois, like it's a great draw for Bill Self and the Jayhawks.
There you go. Who do you like in the region? You like Kansas?
I do like Kansas because I don't trust Wisconsin, especially if Johnny Davis. He has to be elite for Wisconsin to thrive, and if not, if he's not on his game every night, Wisconsin is extremely vulnerable. And then it's hard to be too confident about Auburn with that backcourt. Now, I mean, maybe Bruce Pearl's going to figure it out, but I just wouldn't bet on that happening 4 times to get all the way to the Final Four. So I would say Kansas over Auburn in the regional final there.
I'm going to go off the radar here a little bit. I'm going to go Auburn, Iowa Elite 8 game, and I'm going to take the Hawkeyes to get to the Final Four. I don't know why I think this. I saw Keegan Murray. He is a silky smooth scorer. I really liked what I saw out of him in this tournament. And for some reason, this could be the wild card team to get to, because I think, Matt, as you and I both know, the parity in college basketball this year is incredible. There's not a great team. I think we could all make an argument for probably 15 to 20 teams that we think could make a run to the Final Four and could legitimately make it. So I think this could be the region where you could have a sleeper team, because I don't love Kansas. They're good. They're not great. Self has had a lot of meltdown moments in the tournament. And I just think that this bracket could be the one where somebody out of the blue comes out of nowhere and gets to the Final Four.
Just a quick word. You have Iowa and Auburn in the Elite 8. If we get that game, that is a 90 to 88 basketball game, and that would be terrifically entertaining.
I agree with that. All right, let's go to the East region, last region. Baylor, the 1 seed, Kentucky, the 2 seed. A couple interesting matchups potentially. You have the St. Mary's playing, again, team you know really well. St. Mary's is potentially playing the Wyoming, Indiana winner. Again, a lot of people probably, Wyoming as well. Just give me some nuggets about St. Mary's and Wyoming. I know you cover those guys, and I'll give you, and obviously Indiana, most people probably have seen Indiana the last few days and couple weeks, the run they made in the tournament and such. So give me a little St. Mary's and Wyoming talk.
So with St. Mary's, here's the thing. Chet Holmgren, a magnificently skilled player. No one needs an explanation about that. But he's just a freshman, and he's a string bean. Like, that guy is reed thin, wafer thin. And so what did St. Mary's do when it beat Gonzaga in Moraga, California in late February, and then, gave the Zags another good test in the final of the WCC tournament? St. Mary's roughed up Chet Holmgren. St. Mary's has a physical, grinding, punishing style. They have sculpted, muscular, savvy guys in their lineup. They are physically and mentally tough. They make every basket difficult for you. I mean, they really slowed down Gonzaga's offense. The Zags, normally are just like a knife through warm butter against most of the teams that they play, but against St. Mary's, a lot more playing in the mud. And so it's a real testament to Randy Bennett in terms of how he coaches defense and how he coaches X's and O's, that he knew how to, in terms of personnel and scheme, to slow down Gonzaga twice within the span of 2 weeks. Yeah. When you can do that, that really speaks to his coaching chops. So that's going to make St. Mary's very difficult to deal with. I do like St. Mary's to beat UCLA in a 5-versus-4 game in the round of 32. And then for Wyoming, Hunter Maldonado, he is the guy that Wyoming turns to when it needs a bucket, when it needs clutch free throws. He hit a pair of free throws with 0.2 of a second left to win a key, or to send a late regular season game into overtime, which the Cowboys then won. That helped them barely get into the field. So Hunter Maldonado's the crunch time, climb on my back guy.
Right.
Wyoming has. That's really one of their bigger assets. And the other thing is, Jeff Linder came to Wyoming a few years ago. It's obviously hard to win in Wyoming. It's hard to recruit there. Just look at all the other places where it's really hard to recruit nationally. Like look at Oregon State, just as an example, out here in the West. It's hard to recruit kids to come to Corvallis, Oregon to play college basketball. If it was easy to do that, Oregon State's Elite Eight appearance would have just led to, a tsunami of elite recruits or transfer portal prospects pounding on the doors to go play for Oregon State. But no one wanted to come there, even after the Elite Eight, even after Oregon State was, within a couple baskets of beating Houston to go to the Final Four. Oregon State, of course, went all the way to 3-28. So just to draw the comparison, it's hard to win in Laramie, Wyoming. It's hard to recruit kids to come there. To get to the NCAA tournament as an at-large team at the University of Wyoming. Huge. That tells me a lot about Jeff Linder and the coaching job he has done for the Pokes. So that tells you that Wyoming is an extremely well-coached and resourceful team. It's going to be a fascinating matchup with Indiana in Dayton.
You're not a believer in the experience coming back for UCLA, Jaquez, Zhu Zhang, Tiger Campbell, Mick Cronin?
I'm not. And here's the thing with UCLA. This has been a good season for UCLA, but it's a good season because last year, UCLA made the Final Four and played a lot of really good games to get to the Final Four. But last year, UCLA was an 11 seed. So UCLA improved by 7 seed lines this year. Right. If you improve by 7 seed lines, that's a really good season. The thing about UCLA is that everyone fell in love with the team after the classic national semifinal against Gonzaga and thought, well, you have everybody coming back and you have Peyton Watson, this elite recruit. So UCLA is going to be a top 5 team. See, that was an overreaction. That was assigning too much weight to the Final Four. Not that it wasn't important, not that it wasn't great. Of course it was. But we have to keep in mind that when programs make the Final Four, there are different ways of making the Final Four. There's the way UCLA made it last year, which had some 1983 North Carolina State flavor, with Alabama and Herb Jones missing free throws in the Sweet 16. So that was a lot like Jim Valvano 1983. A little bit of pixie dust. There was good basketball mixed in, to be sure, but UCLA needed some luck. So that was a joyride. Doesn't mean UCLA didn't earn it, but UCLA certainly had all the bounces go its way. So that's one way to make a Final Four. The other way to make a Final Four is 1996 Kentucky, where you beat 4 teams by an average of 25 points. So the thing is, and I think
that ain't happening this year. That ain't happening this year.
Yeah, but you can grasp the larger point I'm trying to make is that when you curb stomp 4 opponents and make the Final Four, of course you're a top 5 team the next season.
Right.
Assuming that you bring back enough players. But UCLA had a joyride, a magic carpet ride as an 11 seed. So the idea that UCLA was going to go from an 11 all the way up to a 1, or maybe the strongest number 2 seed, that was an excessive set of expectations. Getting a 4 seed is a good season, and yet many people are going to think that UCLA underachieved because it had those top 5 expectations before the season. So I don't think UCLA is a suspect team. I just think UCLA is more limited than a lot of people thought it was going to be before the season. And so in UCLA St. Mary's, Mick Cronin and Randy Bennett, they both love to muck it up. They both love to coach defense. They both love to get games in a slow pace in a half court. So I think there's very little daylight between those two teams. And I think that St. Mary's ability to stand up to Gonzaga twice, and let's remember, Gonzaga crushed UCLA early in the season. St. Mary's did an objectively better job playing Gonzaga than UCLA did. That's all I need to know in terms of picking St. Mary's over UCLA.
Bottom of that bracket, you got Kentucky as a 2 seed, a potential second round matchup with Murray State, another in-state Kentucky team. You got San Francisco, your team from the West Coast Conference, and that to think about it, either Murray State or San Francisco will be in the second round of the NCAA tournament, no matter what. Is a 7 seed and a 10 seed. It's hard to believe that those two teams were that highly seeded. One thing I like, a couple things I like about Kentucky. They've got an inside presence with Shibwe, who's an impact All-American type scorer and rebounder. They got some veterans on the team now. They got Grady, the transfer from Davidson. They got Ty Washington. If they can be healthy and make a couple jump shots to open up the lane a little bit for Shibwe, this is a super dangerous team that I think can get out of this region if you're Kentucky and Calipari.
Yeah, it comes down to perimeter shooting for Kentucky, because Kentucky could not hit the side of a barn against Tennessee. But of course, Tennessee or Kentucky is not going to face defenses on par with Tennessee's, in the first 3 rounds of the tournament. Now, if we get a Kentucky Baylor Elite 8 game, which I think we will, so Baylor provides a level of defense that's going to be tough for Kentucky. But this is something that other commentators have noted, and I'm going to pick up on it as well. I think Kentucky probably has not necessarily the best starting 5, but Kentucky has like the best 7-man rotation, 1 through 7. You're really hard pressed to find a better collection of 7 players on the same team than Kentucky. So obviously it starts with Oscar Shibwe, but Ty Washington, Severe Wheeler, Kellen Grady, I think, is really the whole key. Like he has to step up, especially if Kentucky gets to Baylor. Grady will have to have a good game for Kentucky to advance. But defense, rebounding, taking care of the ball, I think Kentucky checks a lot of boxes. And given Baylor's injury limitations, no Jonathan Chachua, he's out for the rest of the season. That limitation certainly gives Kentucky, in my mind, the edge in a possible Elite 8 game. So I think it's all set up for Kentucky to advance out of the East.
I don't think Baylor's getting to the Elite 8. I think Baylor, again, remember this, folks, Marquette, the coach of Marquette is no longer Steve Wojciechowski. It's Shaka Smart, who used to be at Texas. So he knows Baylor very well. So if Marquette can get through North Carolina, I think Shaka Smart, with his pedigree at VCU, Texas, can give Baylor some problems. And like you said, the injury issues at Baylor have been significant. If Marquette doesn't take care of Baylor, I think whoever comes out of that St. Mary's, UCLA, Indiana pod will give Baylor all they want. So I don't think Baylor's getting to the Final 8 personally. I think they're getting knocked out before the Sweet 16. I like Kentucky at the bottom half. My one sleeper in this region would be Purdue. They can score. They've got some bigs. They've got some pretty good guard play. They're not great defensively, but again, getting out of the Big Ten, I think, will help Purdue when you're playing different teams and different styles of play. So I think the sleeper team potentially could be Purdue there. They can score the ball, and as much as we like defense, you ultimately have to have guys that can score the ball in these NCAA tournament games in neutral sites.
Yeah, well, Purdue has not been to the Final Four since 1980. Of course, came agonizingly close in 2019, but Virginia hit the last second buzzer beater to go into overtime and then beat the Boilermakers, leaving them so agonizingly close. So, maybe Purdue has another really good run, and maybe Jaden Ivey is this year's answer to what Carson Edwards was in 2019. And really, if Purdue is going to get to the Final Four, it will need Ivey specifically to go on a Carson Edwards type run, because Carson Edwards was the fuel behind Purdue's run in 2019. Other great Purdue teams have had elite meal ticket scorers. Of course, Glenn Big Dog Robinson on the 1994 team under Gene Cady, which was a #1 seed, but lost to the Grant Hill Cherokee Parks Duke team in the Elite 8 in 1994.
Look at Matt Zemek pulling out Cherokee Parks. I like it.
Yeah. So, the thing with Purdue, though, Purdue's best scorer needs to be the best player on the court. So that means Jaden Ivey has to be at his best. I know you have Zach Edey and Travion Williams, Sasha Stefanovic, also a very good player, but it's Ivey. Jaden Ivey has to be the best player on the floor. So is he going to be the best player on the floor 4 times? He has enough ups and downs to make me think that no, Kentucky's probably going to be able to throw too many bodies at him defensively. And so if we do get a Purdue-Kentucky Sweet 16 matchup, I definitely like the Wildcats in that if that happens.
I like Kentucky getting out of this region. Would be my number 1 selection here. I would go second pick. I would take UCLA. Again, I think the experience of those guys, the guard play. I think Jaquez is a big shot maker. I think Zhu Zhang's a big shot maker. I think in a 4-game condensed situation, I think that UCLA team could put it together. So I'm taking Kentucky or UCLA out of this region.
Yep, I have Kentucky, and so that sets up a Kentucky Gonzaga national semifinal. And I like Kentucky because I referenced this earlier. Chet Holmgren, fantastic player, brilliant. He's probably gonna have a great NBA career, but his body has not filled out yet.
Right, thin as a rail.
St. Mary's showed that he can get shoved around by bigger, heavier, more physical bodies, and that's exactly what Kentucky has. So if Kentucky is able to get to the national semis against Gonzaga, the heft that Kentucky has in its lineup it is built to provide like the St. Mary's level of physicality, but Kentucky has more high-end skill than St. Mary's does. So that is not a good matchup for Gonzaga. You think back to last year's national title game, like Baylor had the dudes. Baylor had thick, physical, cut players, sculpted, muscular players
linebackers
who are able to be much more physical, much more physical than the players Gonzaga had. And Gonzaga, was able to roll through the first 4 rounds of that tournament, but then, going up against Baylor, it was a totally different level of a physical challenge, and Gonzaga was clearly not ready for it. So I think Kentucky really fits that mold very similarly if those 2 teams meet in the Final Four.
I got you. All right, who you got cutting down the nets?
I'm going
to leave this pencil for you now because I know we're doing this interview early in the week here, so I know there's lots of things that happen between now and Thursday. So I'm not holding you to this. Just give me a pencil pick.
Yeah, well, so on the other half, I have Villanova and Kansas, and I think that Villanova, as it did in San Antonio in 2018, would beat Kansas in a national semifinal. So the Wildcats are going to win the national title, but is it going to be Kentucky or Villanova? I think it's going to be Kentucky, and I think that if we get Kentucky and Villanova in the title game, that Oscar Tshiebwe is the difference maker, that Villanova does not have a paint presence on the same level as Tshiebwe, and the thing about Tshiebwe, even if he's not scoring, he's going to pull down 17, 18 rebounds.
Yep.
He's going to get extra possessions for your team. And so as long as Kentucky doesn't turn the ball over, it's probably going to have more possessions than Villanova would. So Kentucky's my pick, but you look at Kentucky, and Kentucky just played like crap against Tennessee.
It did
in the SEC tournament semifinal. So what does that tell you? It tells you, as you said correctly, there is no great team. There's no heavyweight. It's not one team versus the field, or last year it was Gonzaga and Baylor, and then everyone else.
Right.
We don't have that dynamic. So I have Villanova and Kentucky playing the title game. A guy I interviewed on a podcast had Purdue and Arizona. Hey, you could take 2 names out of the hopper, put them in the national title game, and I could say, all right, I can see that happening. So that's the NCAA tournament that we have in front of us. It's going to be amazing.
And a couple more things to note, fans, as you fill out your brackets and as you watch games, the officiating. Remember, these officials are calling. They won't be calling their conferences. They'll be, you'll have Mountain West officials calling an ACC game. You'll have Big Ten officials calling the Big 12, the Big 12 teams and all that stuff. So officiating will be critical in these games. how many of the star players can stay out of foul trouble. There's a lot of big men in the tournament this year. A lot of teams have good big men as opposed to years past. So can the big men stay out of foul trouble? Arizona's guys, Gonzaga's guys, Sheboy from Kentucky. So you got teams with good big men. Can they stay out of foul trouble, and can they adjust to how the game's being officiated? And hopefully the officials will let these guys play and not call so many chippy nickel dimer kind of fouls.
Yeah, and you never know what kind of a whistle you're going to get, and it's this is where coaches really show up. You know, when coaches get into the NCAA tournament, and in the first 5 minutes that you see how a game is being officiated, you know, can you get through to your players and tell them, hey, this is how the game is being officiated. So
Yep.
this is how we have to adjust, you know, how we go about our business. You know, the great coaches will get their players to make those in-course midstream adjustments to how the whistle's going, so that their players don't get in foul trouble, are able to defend intelligently, are able to attack intelligently on offense. So, you know, that alchemy is always part of the puzzle of getting through the NCAA tournament to the Final Four and then the national title stand in early April.
And one last point to talk about, we'll get you out of here. The importance of the details, making your free throws. Villanova is a great example of a team that makes their free throws. And that goes back to guard play. Typically, the good guard play teams with good guard play are the guys that can make free throws in the last minute and a half of a game. And when you need a bucket, do you have a guy on your team that you can give the ball to and say, go get us 2 points?
No doubt about it. And, you know, with guard play, I would just underscore that, you know, Connor Gillespie of Villanova was not, you know, an extremely prominent player, not playing anywhere near his best early in the season, but the version of him that has shown up the past month, he's become the stone cold killer that everyone expected him to be. And so, you know, as long as Gillespie is playing at this exalted level, that's what I reiterate. That's why I have so much confidence in Villanova at this tournament.
And Gonzaga has the same thing with Nebhart. He's not the greatest player in the world, but he's great for that team. He gets the team in the right positions, the right sets. He's not an elite athlete, but he makes the open shot when he needs to make it. He's good in and around the lane as far as floaters, and he makes his free throws at the end of the game. So I think those two kind of guys in older teams, you got a lot of transfers, you got a lot of 5th and 6th year players because of COVID. So be on the lookout for older teams to have success in this tournament.
No doubt about it. And the fact that there is so much parity in this particular year of college basketball, it does stand to reason that, you know, without extraordinary talent on various teams, that it's going to be that savvy, you know, wisdom-filled group, you know, which knows how to play together and is going to maximize its resources, that's going to be the kind of team that wins the national title.
You got it, man. All right, Matt, great work, man. Awesome nuggets on all teams all over the country. Hopefully, folks, if you're listening, you're learning something about teams from all over the place, not just the West Coast, East. We're giving you nuggets about teams all over the country and all conferences and such. So, Matt, tell everybody where they can find your work online and all that good stuff.
Trojanswire.usatoday.com. So covering USC and also the Pac-12, you know, Arizona and UCLA during the NCAA tournament, on Twitter at Trojans Wire. You know, we're just going to be diving into that USC Miami matchup. And, you know, if USC is able to get through that, we're going to have, you know, extended coverage of what is likely to be a USC Auburn matchup over the weekend. And of course, once USC's season is over, like Andy Enfield, you know, he got the big contract extension, got the pay raise from athletic director Mike Bone. He, you know, this is raising the bar in terms of expectations at USC, not a traditional basketball school, but like USC's made the investment in him. So that ratchets up the pressure. He needs to make some very splashy acquisitions in the transfer portal. So we're going to be covering how he handles the offseason.
Okay, I'm gonna send you a Tom Brady shirt in the mail, okay, for his 23rd season. Okay, I'm gonna put Zemek on the back. Zemek number 20 instead of 12. I'm gonna make you 21, Zemek. Okay.
Whatever works, Jason.
Hey, has Lincoln Riley invited you out to his $17 million pad yet to the compound?
No, he has not. And of course, I'm in Phoenix, so it's not as though Lincoln Riley would have a chance to do that. But hey, this is Lincoln Riley has a lot of pressure on his back. So when he sleeps at night, he's gonna sleep on a very soft bed in a very cushy and palatial home. So he will need to get his beauty sleep, because when he's awake, there's going to be 24/7 pressure on his back at USC.
Well, Matt, he's got a private jet. He'll come pick you up in Phoenix, man. He's got access to the G5 from USC.com. Come on.
If only I was that much of a power player in the college sports industry. If only.
And one more sneaky note that happened a couple months ago. That's major news for USC. They got the kid from Oklahoma, Williams. Talk about that for 1 minute.
Well, the thing about Caleb Williams is that, Jackson Dart transferred to Ole Miss. So with Keaton Slovis transferring to Pitt, that quarterback room got very, very thin for USC. And so, you will remember, Jason, that there were rumors that Caleb Williams would go to Wisconsin because Bobby Ingram, the former Seattle Seahawk, he had an in with the Williams family. So there were worries from the Trojans that Wisconsin was going to swoop in and pluck Caleb Williams. So if that had happened, USC would have been very thin and under-equipped at quarterback. So in addition to everything everyone knows about Caleb Williams, great dual threat quarterback, tremendous open field speed, can throw downfield dimes. The biggest value, the biggest sense of importance attached to Caleb Williams is that if he had not come to USC, the Trojans were in real trouble for 2022. So Caleb Williams, in many ways, saved Lincoln Riley's bacon in year one at USC, giving the Trojans a chance to do something special.
All right, buddy. Great work, man. Keep it up, and we'll definitely be in touch as we move throughout the spring and in the summer, man. Have a great week, and hope you have a great bracket, man. How many brackets do you do? One?
I'm a one bracket guy.
Okay.
You put down your picks, you ride with them, and you live with the consequences.
There you go, man. All right, Matt. Have a great week, my man.
It's one of the greatest weeks in sports. I hope you enjoy it too, Jason.
Yeah, but just so you know, I'm going to be sick Thursday and Friday, so I'll be at a sports bar somewhere watching all the games.
Absolutely. You're a good American.
All right, good luck, buddy. Talk to you soon.
Thanks, Jason. Always great to be on the Powers on Sports podcast.
Appreciate it. And we'll be right back with more on the Powers on Sports podcast. Appreciate you, Matt.
You bet. Loved it. Always love it.
Great work.
Thank you.
So enjoy.